Well, welcome everybody. My name is David Kopshever. I'm a ranger at Katmai National Park. I'll be live on the webcam here on the bear cam for the next hour or so doing a play-by-play. If you're not familiar with that setup, I'll be live here giving you my commentary on the bear action that we're seeing. It's kind of like sports commentary but for wild animals. It's a lot of fun. Go ahead and put any questions that you have into the explore.org chat box and I'll do my best to answer as many as I can. I'm standing here on an elevated viewing platform in Brooks Camp at Brooks Falls in Katmai National Park, Alaska. We're located at the base of the Alaska Peninsula. We're a very remote national park. You got to get here by either float plane or sometimes by boat. But if you get here, it is absolutely worth it. We're one of the premier bear viewing destinations in the world. The bears that you're seeing on the camera here are wild. This is not a zoo. And they're here every year to catch wild sockeye salmon, one of the biggest salmon runs in the world. The biggest sockeye salmon run in the world comes through Bristol Bay, and part of that reaches here to Brooks Camp and Brooks Falls. So we get to see the same bears come back every year. We get to learn a lot about them as individuals, learn their life histories, learn some of the trials and tribulations they've been through. And from that information, we can learn a lot about brown bears in general. And we do have numbers for all of our bears here in Brooks Camp. All the bears that we see on a regular basis, we've assigned a number to, and sometimes a nickname gets associated with that. We do that in order to keep track of these animals as individuals. They are all very unique. They've been through different experiences, and they act and behave differently. And you can pick them out from one another by their physical characteristics, maybe differences in their face, in their coat, different scars, and different behaviors as well. Different fishing techniques, different levels of habituation to other bears. So if you're new to the bear cam and you want to learn more about the bears, you want to learn how to identify some of these bears as individuals, check out the Bear ID book. You can find that at the top of the chat on explore.org or on Katmai's webpage, nps.gov/KATM. A lot of great information about the Brooks River, about this area, and also a lot of great information about each one of the bears that we see regularly here on the river. You'll be able to find photographs of each bear throughout the season, so you can compare those photos to what you're seeing on the cams or here in person. You'll also get a good description of each bear, some of their behaviors, and a bit about their life history. So we've got quite a few bears here at the falls today. Fishing up on the lip is 775 Lefty. Down below in the jacuzzi, 32 Chunk. Up a bit farther down across the river, standing sort of by that outcropping rock, is 480 Otis, and behind him is 755 Scaredy Bear. Above the falls is 151 Walker. I noticed in the chat that there was some speculation that maybe it wasn't 151. I'm pretty convinced it is, but we'll keep an eye on them and see what we see. Down below the falls, we have another really pretty large male bear. I haven't gotten too good of a look at him quite yet, so we'll keep an eye on him and see if we can get a better look, see if we can get an identification for that bear. But he's been fishing down in the riffles area for the last 30 minutes or so. He appears to be pretty successful there. We'll see if he moves up to compete with these other dominant male bears at Brooks Falls. And just before we went live here, we had a little interaction between 32 Chunk and 480 Otis. 32 is a young adult bear. I believe he's about 13 years old. Really in the prime of his life. This year he's ascended the bear hierarchy. He's become one of the most dominant bears on the river. Perhaps the most dominant bear. And just before we went live here, he pushed 480 Otis out of the jacuzzi. That's that white water that 32, the darker bear, is standing in. Really the most productive fishing location at the falls if a bear knows how to use it. And 32, walked up to 480 Otis, sat down right in front of him. And 480 didn't seem too happy about it. He was doing a lot of growling, a lot of vocalization. But as the less dominant bear, he did move away. There was no physical interaction, as is generally the case when bears are competing over fishing access. Although it certainly does happen, and we do have quite a few bears here who show evidence of that those physical confrontations. The bear that just caught a fish moved down towards the 480 and went back up to the lips, 775 lefty. He's got a very large wound in the center of his chest. And if he turns our way, we'll get a good look at it. It's most visible when he's sitting down. And I hope somebody got a screenshot of that. Like I said before, these bears are wild animals. This is not a zoo. They're not pets. We've got this really unique situation here where we're able to get an in-depth look at their lives. And that's all brought to you by explore.org. If you're watching on Katmai's Facebook page and you haven't heard of explore.org, I'd encourage you to check them out. They're a non-profit organization funded by the Annenberg Foundation, and they exist in order to bring wild places and wild animals to folks who might not be able to get there in person. A great resource for learning about wild animals. They have live webcams all over the world. They bring walrus, eagles, osprey, bears, brown bears, polar bears, panda bears, beluga whales, all kinds of different wild animals straight to your home via the internet. And so we're partnered with them to bring you the bear cam with the bears of Brooks Falls. So once again, feel free to throw any questions you have into the chat on explore.org in the comment section below the video feed. Now I've got a question from Laranor asking if I can explain the change in dominance hierarchy from 856 to 32 chunk being the top bear, and have I seen any of the other large males stand up to 32. Last night I did see 480. I've seen to anybody standing up to 32. 32, I've seen him stealing fish from other large dominant bears, including 480, including 755. And he seems to fish anywhere he pleases. I have not seen him interact with 747. We haven't seen 747 at the falls. I don't think... We may have seen him earlier in the season. I have not myself. He has been seen in the lower river in the last week by a different ranger. Again, not by myself, but I do trust the identification there. He was not reported to have any injuries. And we're really not sure why he hasn't been using the falls. Maybe it is because he wants to avoid 32. Maybe they had a physical confrontation earlier off camera, and 747 has been kind of pushed out of the falls area. That's a possibility. Perhaps he's finding perfectly fine fishing conditions elsewhere on the river. Perhaps he's chasing females. We are still, mating season is slowing down, but it's still possible the bears could be courting and mating with one another at this time of year. Another question, has 410 been seen? We haven't seen 410 in quite a while now, but that's actually pretty normal. 410 seems to leave the river periodically throughout the summer. I remember last year, I don't remember the exact dates, but she, again, middle of July, she took off and wasn't seen again until September, mid-September. So kind of typical behavior for that bear. And a question from Lynn about 634 Popeye. We haven't seen him, at least I haven't seen him or heard reports about 634 in, I'd say, about a week and a half or maybe 2 weeks, if my memory serves correctly. He was last seen with an injured foot. But it's very well possible that he could be fishing elsewhere on the river, fishing on a different river, avoiding the need to interact and compete with other males that could do him more harm. In a kind of weakened state, that'd be a pretty smart move on his part. So we can hope that he's doing well, eating well, and healing up so he can get back into the mix at the falls, on the cams, and take advantage of this extremely successful fishing area at the falls. Also a question here, interesting question by Susan Ridd about how many salmon a female bear can eat. She notes that we can often see 30 or 40 salmon being eaten by one of these large males, but not so much by the females. We tend to not see them eat that many fish. I can't say for sure how many salmon a female bear can successfully catch, but there's certainly some very successful female bears on this river. Every bit as successful as some of these males. And, I wouldn't be surprised if they can eat just as many. And I would guess that we're not seeing them, we're not counting that, because they tend to not stay in one place for quite as long. They've got cubs to look after. A sow with cubs, has to look after her family, so she might fish one area in the river, move away from a male, move away from another dominant bear, fish another area of the river, and be a little bit more mobile. And it sounds like on the BBC special, Wild Alaska, it was mentioned that the salmon run hasn't quite started out on the coast. It is indeed timed differently. I spent some time in Amelik Bay over last August, and the salmon run had just started in the middle of August at Geographic Harbor in Amelik Bay. The Geographic River has not so many sockeye salmon, but instead they have a chum and pink salmon run that comes through quite a bit later than the sockeye salmon here at Brooks Camp. And so here you can see that injury with 775 right dead center in the middle of his chest. And it looks like he's using a kind of dash and grab technique, as we call it. It seems to be very successful right now, and there's this many fish in the river. And we don't often talk about this, the 775 lefty in this way because he is so energetic. But he is, you know, one of our older male bears. He certainly doesn't act very old, but he was first identified as an adult in 2004. So that puts him really, you know, we can't know for sure, but probably around the same age as 480 Otis. And we've got some interesting interaction here between 32 Chunk and 151, who just started to come down towards the top of the falls, and 32 gave him some interest, started moving towards him, started to show him kind of who is boss, show him that he's not welcome to come and compete with 32 for this salmon resource. And you can see 151 now on the top of the falls moving away, not wanting any part of a fight with 32. And this has kind of been the story over the last few weeks. 32 Chunk has been fishing anywhere he likes and pushing other smaller bears or even other large bears out of his desired fishing locations. You know, and I am relatively certain, I mentioned earlier there's a little discussion in the chat that maybe this wasn't 151. I'm, you know, as convinced as I ever am when I see a bear that it is indeed the one I think, 151 Walker. But identifying bears is not an exact science. Rangers get it wrong. Cam viewers get it wrong. It's good to have some skepticism anytime you're trying to determine which bear you're looking at. .151 is a younger adult male, about 11 and a half years old. And he's a bear you'll see a lot at the falls. You know, not the most dominant bear. He's pushed out of his desired fishing location quite often, but he adapts very well. He'll move out of the way of other larger bears and fit in where he can, where they don't want to fish. A very adaptable young bear. You can identify him by his large ears, large round ears, a slightly upturned, tapered muzzle. And in the summertime, he has dark black rings around his eyes, dark eye rings. And it'll be interesting to see here how far 32 goes to push 151 out of this. And I myself don't believe I've ever seen a 32 fish at the top of the falls. It's almost like he's fishing this area just so that 151 cannot. And you know, bears aren't mean. That's more of a human characteristic. But bears do have to compete over these resources for survival. If they don't put on enough weight over the short summer here, they will not survive the wintertime. And so 32, you know, it's not that he has a grudge against 151 or that he dislikes 151. He's simply protecting his food resources, making sure that he can pack on as many pounds as possible for the coming harsh winter. And so even though 32 has become very dominant and he's become very successful in putting on weight and fishing in certain areas, particularly the jacuzzi and the shallower water on the other side of the river there, on the other side of the falls, it looks like he hasn't quite mastered fishing from the lip quite yet. He's not quite far enough out. Bears really have to stand, you know, kind of dangerously close to the edge of the waterfall in order to be successful there. And by far the most successful area is just in front of where 32 is, a bit closer to us, to the viewing platform. There's that bit that sticks out a little ways. Bears can shimmy their way out to the very edge of that, and that's that desired fishing location. That's where you're going to be most successful. So he may be the top bear right now, but he's still got some things to learn. But there goes 151. Like I said, very adaptable. Got pushed out of his where he looked like he was going to try to fish up on the top by 32, and he's just simply moved on to another area, not missing a beat. And of course, we've got the always entertaining the 775 lefty. He's nicknamed for that short left ear. And this is a bear that's got a lot of scars all over his body. He's got a scar on his right hip towards his rear end, some scars on his shoulders and neck. And like I mentioned, that big open wound we can see now on his chest probably form another large scar. So he's around probably the same age as 480 Otis, around 20 years old, maybe older. But bears can live to be about 25 or 30 years old. 410, the bear I mentioned earlier, we haven't seen in quite a while, which I mentioned, pretty normal for her. She is the oldest bear on the Brooks River. If I recall correctly, I believe 410 is 28 or 29 years old. So really pushing that limit. But she's got great food resources here on the river. Has really learned how to be successful here, how to avoid danger, how to avoid other more dominant bears. And part of that technique may be to, during the real peak season, move away to a different, a little bit quieter area. Now we've got this pretty large male, it appears to be a male bear, that's come up from the riffles. I mentioned him earlier. I do believe it's a male. Seems to be too big to be a female. Not quite sure who this is. He's got an interesting scar right there on his shoulder hump, if you can make it out. And this is indeed a male. We can see him urinating right now, and that's one of the best ways to tell the sex of a bear. Males urinate straight down, females urinate with a stream out back behind them. So this bear's been scavenging down in the riffles and now scavenging here closer to the falls as well. And sometimes it takes some time to identify a bear. Really get a good look at all their physical characteristics, get a look at their behavior, where they're fishing, how they interact with other bears. But we've got a great pool of knowledge with the viewers. A lot of you folks who are watching, have been watching for a long time, have gotten really good at identifying bears. So if you have any ideas of who this is, feel free to enter it in the comments. And just for further verification, I can see this bear's penis, so he is definitely a male. But there's just so many salmon right now. Even a large male bear can do quite well just picking up the leftovers from others. Skin that hasn't been peeled off, if the brain wasn't eaten, maybe there's some belly left. The belly of a salmon is very high in fat, as is the roe if it's a female salmon. So even a large male can stay very safe by scavenging salmon, staying out of those desired fishing areas, can still put on a whole lot of fat and have access to a lot of calories. So some interesting characteristics we're seeing here. That scar on the shoulder hump, several scars on the shoulder hump and bottom of the neck. On his right shoulder, there's another very unique looking scar. Pretty dark face, ears placed pretty far apart on the sides of his head. Lots of little scars on his forehead. Also very dark forearms. I got a great question here in the chat about, how large is a bear's range? How far from this location will they roam? And that's a question that science has not yet answered. We know bears are capable of traveling hundreds of miles. There's been recorded instances of bears that got into human areas, got into people's food, and were a part of some real serious bear-human conflicts. And there's been instances where we've flown those bears, not in Katmai necessarily, but in other areas in Alaska where we've flown those bears hundreds of miles away. I believe, if I remember correctly, the longest I've read about was 400 miles away from where they were found, and they came back within that year. So they're able to traveling huge distances. The question is, are they willing to? A bear at Brooks Falls has access to some really good food, and it doesn't have, as far as we know, a great reason to roam that far from this resource. But that is a question that we're trying to answer. In particular, Ranger Michael Saxton is trying to answer with his genetics study. That's one of the primary goals of the study. He's taking samples from bears, DNA samples from bears here in Brooks Camp via a biopsy dart, which will also help determine patriarchal relationships, to determine a family tree for the bears at Brooks Camp. But another primary goal of that study is to determine how far bears will roam from this area. He's also taking DNA samples from bears out on the coast, primarily from hair snares. So we set up snares all over Katmai, and we're going to be able to see what the shared level of genes are between the different populations of bears here in the park. And he can then also compare those data sets to DNA samples that have been taken from bears outside of the park along the Alaskan Peninsula. And we can see this new bear, first of all, you can see that scar on his shoulder pretty clearly now, but we can see him fishing really close to 151 Walker. And so far, 151 doesn't seem to be too bothered. And that would indicate to me that this is not the most aggressive, not the most dominant bear, this new bear that we're seeing here. And it's possible this is a bear that is new to the area. It's also possible that it's a bear we don't recognize, or a bear that we just don't know about very well. There's a lot of bears that Ranger Leslie, our bear monitor and bear biologist, has seen throughout the years, but only infrequently. It's not, this bear may have a number, and it's just not one that we're familiar with. But what we can do in the absence of that number is we can observe and see how it behaves, how it interacts with other bears. And the more we see it, the more we'll learn about it. And looks like we have 32 coming back down. Gonna push this new bear out. Also pushing Walker away. And you can see the signs of dominance here with 32 chunk. Ears forward. Just a laser beam of focus on this bear. And you know, the more bears that are fishing at the falls here, that means less fish for 32. So any opportunity he has to easily chase away another bear that could take up his resources, he's gonna take that opportunity. And we're getting, you know, every day more and more evidence that this is indeed the most dominant bear on the river now, 32 chunk. And just below us here, looks like we have bear 273, another younger bear, a female. She's walking out of view now. .32 really making the rounds and establishing his dominance with every bear he sees the opportunity to. I was talking a few moments ago about the genetic study led by Ranger Michael Saxton, and I've got a few questions since starting to talk about that, about inbreeding in bears. What's the level of inbreeding? And that's another question that this study is going to help to answer. An area like the Brooks River, we have the same bears coming back every single year, for the most part. And so this is an area where inbreeding is more likely to occur. Certainly more likely than inland areas of Alaska where there are grizzly bears that don't have access to marine food sources, don't congregate in such close proximity to one another in order to gain access to those food resources. And here's another behavior that I haven't seen a whole lot anyways, is 151 walker fishing on the lip of the falls. Certainly is a good spot to be right now, and he's a little bit closer than 32 was. We'll see if he can be successful for there. He's still not in that, he's not in that sweet spot. He's a little bit closer to us is where he really should be if he wants to be the most successful, but still figuring things out, still learning how to be successful. And there he goes there, making it work. So 32 is not yet returned after following 273 out of sight behind the platform. Very possible that there's some courting going on there. They could be mating just behind the platform. I haven't seen any massive attention that way, so I'm going to assume we can't see it from up here. But that's kind of the reward that a dominant male bear gets. He's able to pass his genes on. If another less dominant bear were to try to mate with any females in 32's presence right now, he'd probably chase them off and ensure that he's the one that's able to reproduce. He's able to pass on his good genes, his big bear genes. And by doing that, you get the biggest and strongest bears being produced year after year. Now, you've probably been noticing a few of the bears, including 151 Walker just now. They're not eating all the fish at this point in the year. That's pretty common. When there's this many fish present, it makes a lot more sense for these bears to only eat the fattiest part of the fish. So that's going to be the skin, the brain, the belly, if it's a female fish, the roe. Walker's been really pretty successful here on the lip. Now, I don't know if I've ever seen him fishing from there, but maybe someone here in the chat can attest differently. But as we can see here, he's peeling off the skin, getting into the belly. And now getting into the brain. It just makes so much more sense for the bears to eat only the fattiest parts, because then they fill up only on the most nutrient-rich aspects of the fish. It's like going to a all-you-can-eat buffet. You know, you're not going to stack your plate up with bread. You're going to get the shrimp, the crab, the steak. You're going to take advantage of all the best foods available to you. And it looks like here some other people have seen 151 fishing the lip. That's interesting information to know for me. You know, it is really surprising though that it's just so cool to see him take advantage of every opportunity that comes his way. As soon as 32 took off, he went into one of these really more desirable fishing locations. And it's likely that if 32 comes back along, he'll move away and take advantage of a different location. Stay safe, but still stay productive. And the more 151 here can take advantage of these situations. The more he can put on weight, and that'll have a cumulative effect over the years. You know, he'll come back bigger and get a little bit bigger each year, and he may become more and more dominant as the years go on. He's 11.5 now, and he could rise through the bear hierarchy in the coming years. And we've seen him drop a couple fish, drop a couple sockeye salmon. And, you know, we can't know for sure if he's doing that intentionally, if they're slipping out of his mouth. There have been some theories, particularly by some folks at the McNeil River, that perhaps bears are selecting for female salmon. Perhaps they're able to determine somehow, either by smell or by feel, whether or not that salmon has roe. The eggs of a salmon are extremely high in fat. But this is just kind of another one of those examples of, you know, we can't know exactly, can't always know why bears do what they do. It's not quite possible to go out and you know, retrieve all those salmon that 151 has dropped and determine if they're male or female. So just a quick overview as the bears have moved around quite a bit. 151 Walker fishing the lip. 775 Lefty just past the jacuzzi, and 480 Otis by the rock. We've also got some new bears showing up a little bit downriver. We'll see if we can get a good view from here. Appears to be a subadult here, one that I'm not able to identify. Subadults are super difficult to distinguish between one another. They change a lot throughout the year. They change a lot from year to year. And, you know, they all have a lot of similar physical characteristics and similar behavioral characteristics as well. They do a lot of dash and grab fishing, running after fish, trying to pounce on them, a lot of scavenging. They're generally pretty lanky, like they haven't grown quite into their bodies, longer legs. And they often lack unique scars and wounds. There's also a family group a little bit farther down, kind of behind the trees. Appears to be 153 and her 3 yearling cubs. And we'll see if they come into better view shortly. And I'm coming up on the 1 hour mark, so I'm going to wrap up shortly. A few things I want to touch on with 153. I've heard a lot of folks asking about her cubs. They're different colors. different sizes, as are 128's cubs, and that's fairly normal. Oftentimes, you know, just like humans are born sometimes in slightly different sizes, so are bear cubs, and that size can be compounded throughout the summer and throughout the few years as they're raised by their mother. The siblings have to compete with one another for food. So the bear that's born smaller will grow more slowly than the bear cub that's born larger. The larger cub's are going to get better access to food, able to push its siblings away and put on fat more quickly. One interesting thing that I haven't seen in any other family groups, one of 153's cubs has a natal collar as a yearling. That's a white ring around its shoulders and neck. And that's generally, as I've seen it, and as I understand, only in spring cubs. Oftentimes black bears will retain their natal collar for several years after being spring cubs and even into adulthood. I haven't heard of brown bears having that same physical characteristic. So somewhat unusual in my experience. Doesn't necessarily mean there's anything wrong with this cub. And so I'm going to be wrapping up here soon. I did want to address a question that was asked here a few minutes ago about whether or not rangers come out to the platform at night to see if bears that aren't so habituated to people might use the falls at those times. The falls platform does close at 10 p.m. It's closed from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. between June 15th and August 15th. It's the peak bear viewing season. And so folks aren't allowed to view bears during those times. On a few scheduled dates throughout the year, our bear biologist will come out and monitor bear activity to get an idea, you know, of what is the impact that we have here viewing bears from an elevated viewing platform such as this. And she has found that some bears do choose to use the falls only when there are no people present. And so we keep the platform closed during those times to allow bears to access the river, access the falls. Bears like the 755 scaredy bear will only fish on the far side of the river when people are present. When everybody goes away, he'll come out into the middle and get some of those more prime fishing locations. You know, all bears are definitely different from one another. All bears are unique. They have unique stories to tell. They've gone through unique experiences. One of the bears we've been focusing on a lot here is a 32 chunk. Not on screen quite this moment. But he's shown himself to be very dominant. Perhaps the most dominant bear on the falls, at the falls here. And so, you know, I'm gonna sign off for now, but I hope you continue to watch and look out for those really interesting interactions. We can learn a lot about brown bears by viewing them as individuals. If we weren't able to distinguish which bear is which, we wouldn't be able to follow their life stories, follow their, you know, follow the lessons they have to tell. The salmon are continuing to swim into the Neck River. We've got some more bear viewing happening in the next few days, next few weeks. So stay tuned, continue to enjoy, and thanks for joining me. I'll see you guys next time.